you and I perhaps have a lot of aesthetic similarity, but we have a disagreement in cause. I tend to look at things politically and materially, and I think that capitalism is to blame for so much of this aesthetic degradation. And I think that extractive, mass-produced schlock capitalism that is making our buildings look so terrible in New York is what has reached its final apex with the generators.
Do you have a suggestion outside of capitalism?
I'm not an economist. I'm just an artist. That's why I'm at the table with all of you.
This is where we always end up, though.
However, what I would say is that it's never simply been an all or nothing, right?
Now, in the entertainment business, there's a lot of discussion of first screen and second screen. First screen being your phone, and the second screen being, the movie you're watching or the TV show you're watching or whatever else you're doing. And so built into that view is this fragmentation of consciousness. And it means that the second screen, a movie or a TV series or whatever, kind of can't be too complicated and can't be too deep and can't make too big of a demands on the viewer because you have to leave room for the viewer to, keep up with texting and stuff.
People can binge watch like a dumb sitcom, but then if you want them to sit down for like a good 2-hour film, they get distracted immediately.
Exactly. At the level of entertainment itself, we're kind of creating this system that amuses us and maybe addicts us and keeps us stimulated, but is in some ways blocking us from kind of the deeper enjoyments of not just entertainment, but art.
Maybe we can make a distinction between entertainment and art. That's a big discussion, and even how we define art could take up many hours. But maybe, a simplified take on that is that art forces us to engage with the world in a different way, pushes our thinking past the boundaries. It's not merely about distracting and self-soothing, which is, what entertainment does, I think. I also recognize that digital media in particular is not just a potent drug, but also a powerful tool that's fully integrated into modern life, and we're not going to unintegrate it.
Marya, what about you? What do you think? Are we looking for higher meaning in entertainment?
Entertainment, and especially if we're talking about film and television, tend to be about storytelling. Now, reality television is really different, but if you're talking about scripted kind of content, a lot of that is meaning making. It is actually about finding meaning. Storytelling is how human beings have always made meaning in the world, right? Since the beginning of time. It's actually the way that we understand the world around us. It's the way that we used to document history, right? Our oral traditions and these kinds of things.
For us humans, it's easier for us to find meaning through storytelling. I really resonated with that because as a Muslim, we see that the Quran is the words of God, right? And so the way God conveys so many different ideas and so many different things that we should implement or learn from is through storytelling. It should mean something. It means that we react to it on a much deeper level than we would like to believe.
I actually think a lot of filmmakers would say that cinema, film, television is art, right? It's a transformative, it's a transportive way for people to move beyond their boundaries. And so the problem here is just scale and volume. We have so much noise that it makes it much more difficult to have an appropriate relationship at this point.
We are witnessing a cultural decline because we are witnessing a distance from language and from writing and from all those systems and processes that used to be a filter for ideas. That's how you had a judgment of taste in society. Whereas now it became all subjective because we no longer have this standard of taste to judge against.
That's not true.
Well,
I don't agree with that.
Don't agree with.
There's always so many things that you have to consider that you shouldn't be thinking just from a you perspective. You should be thinking from a everyone perspective.
Everyone has their own tastes. If there's something you don't like, you will find someone who does like it. And if there's something you like, you will find someone who doesn't like it.
We always forget that our profession is very subjective, meaning the beauty to judge a beautiful building from a non-beautiful building is very subjective. Beauty is subjective. So architecture
we can
and
argue
design.
against this, okay?
Sorry?
I'll wait till you finish this point, but I mean, some people argue against this subjectivity.
Absolutely.
No, beauty is subjective.
Absolutely not. You know, you can argue like wishy-washy that, oh, everything is subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah, okay, like I get it. It could be good for you, but objectively there are standards of beauty.
I'm just saying that from an external appearance, architecture, whether it's modern, traditional, etc., whether it's reflecting certain era, it's subjective. But the most important thing we forget is what this building is adding a value to the way we interact with our surroundings and with our kind of buildings. I think we have one of the most serious, important professions in history, because we are a space and the placemakers. We are drawing the cities, and we are also affecting the day-to-day life of people. And if you look at it now, I think we lost the touch and we lost the feel of our kind of mission as an architects and how it plays a huge part in society. Up to date, the only buildings that actually stands out are the buildings that's been built centuries ago.
Is beauty in architecture, you think, a universal language that transcends time, or is it a reflection of each generation's evolving values?
I think that there are objective criteria to beauty. And
absolutely.
to say otherwise would be to have a very relativistic and subjective point of view on it, because then it's like, well, beauty can be anything. And I don't mean by saying that there are objective criteria that there is like, this is beauty, black and white, that's it.
It's in the eye of the beholder.
No, I wouldn't say so. I would say that there is a range that you can define and strive towards finding some definitions.
That is so true. About how it's not about beauty in the eye of the beholder. Architecture is so much more. It's not just about if you find it subjectively beautiful or not. It's about, does it serve its purpose? Is it holistic in the way that it's built? Like, does it help the community, or can it be used by the locals?
There is some objective criteria, like for instance, just some basics that there should be a harmony. Then you can define, well, what is harmony? Well, that there should be some kind of a symmetry, some kind of a ratio between what is being built, some kind of connection to nature, some ornamentation. What ornamentation is most beautiful? Is it the Hindu ornamentation, or the Islamic ornamentation, or the Viking ornamentation?
So it's subjective.
Well, that is more maybe subjective, but you can make some arguments and find some similarities that, well, maybe all of them that are being called beautiful do have some connections to patterns found in nature. Well, then you're one step closer to finding an objective truth.
This is my guy. This and the real.
Our guy. Our guy.
Yeah, you know what? I thought I was going to disagree with him, but
yeah, honestly, no, same. I thought I was going to disagree.
I do think that there are objective values to beauty that expand across times and cultures and everything, but then some aspects of it are subjective. Just to expand on that and relate it to what was said about art, I think that has mixed into the conception of beauty, making like everything that is beauty is the eye of the beholder, and I do not agree with that.
What needs should architecture serve today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, architecture is, everyone knows, the art of building. So that's actually two things. One is a material, physical, technological enterprise, and the other is art. So we have to be very clear about this. And if you really want to discuss these issues, you have to distinguish between these two. They are very closely interconnected. So there is the functional material shaping of the environment, essentially to meet our requirements, our needs for shelter and comfort and environmental protection. That's the technical material aspect of it. But there is an art aspect. What is art? Then the question is, what is art at all? And let's say in very briefly that it is about communication, and communication in particular of what is real.
Architecture
works on the idea that you continue to create a better world. You're saying that we have failed to do so. I'm really interested in what would be your ideal scenario.
Well, I think the premise is kind of here confusing, because it is the modernist project is a project that came in the aftermath of the war, like we've been saying now for a long time, and that was a moment to establish the aftermath also of the legacy of the colonial powers who were retrieving themselves and retrieving their forces from places like the Muslim world and Africa and all over the world. So they made sure, by creating those systems as an extension to them, whether political or architectural or economic, they made sure that through the built environment that they have this legacy maintained in order for these interests to survive. So you're asking me what is the replacement or alternative to colonization? Of course, it's freedom. And
no, give me an architectural scenario where, because I think we have, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but we really have heard about the objection.
No, you're not. I think architecture of meaning is what I'm advocating here and highlighting here, and it's a moment of history that, as much as the collapse happened, it also happened throughout the history that you reach an architecture of meaning where a reconciliation between the spiritual worldview happened with the ruling power, so the power system. And when you have these two systems working in harmony, you have a space for art to thrive, and you have a space for people to respond through their art and architecture, and to address ontological and existential questions that we cease to have any room to ask because of modernist approach.
I mean, I think about the power of the Italian stonemasons, right, who carved all of those beautiful gargoyles and nudes all over New York City. There is no one in New York that will pay for sculptors to do that now. And it's not because they're postmodern, and it's not because they're leftists. It's because they want to make as much money, squeeze as much money as they can out of each building. And I think that you and I perhaps have a lot of aesthetic similarity, but we have a disagreement in cause. I tend to look at things politically and materially, and I think that capitalism is to blame for so much of this aesthetic degradation. And I think that extractive, mass-produced schlock capitalism that is making our buildings look so terrible in New York is what has reached its final apex with the generators.
Do you have a suggestion outside of capitalism?
I'm not an economist. I'm just an artist. That's why I'm at the table with all of you.
This is where we always end up, though.
However, what I would say is that it's never simply been an all or nothing, right? There's this sort of democratic socialism that is quite common in Europe. Not everything has to be builded as fast and cheap and hideously as possible, like it is in America.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at all the major sculptural works that are going across Britain and the West now, it's dreadful. It's dreadful work. Would you say that that's due to capitalism that's driving that? Just sort of like a weird twisted shape with something thrown around it. I mean, people majoritively now, people are getting so sick of this, and they're like,
I'm sick of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't look to that and say, oh yeah, these silly pieces of sculpture that are now getting put on every single sort of street corner or major apparent sort of area of importance in across London or major cities across Europe. I wouldn't look at that and say that's capitalism, because if you look at it, these pieces of these works, it's not the cheapest thing that's going there. These works are sometimes funded with millions that go into it. The point that I'm making is actually you could actually have some really quite strong monumental work in stone or bronze or a collective. Bring a series of sculptors together and have them make something. You could fund it. You could probably even do it cheaper than than some of the budgets these artists connected or interconnected with institutions. And again, it's because they deny the aesthetic importance. It's because they have spoken away and used language like a corrosive measure to attack aesthetic strength.
But I think to add to that layer, what is the difference between design and art, one would say? Because I always, is asked this question. And, when went through my cancer journey, I had a really big issue with how the hospitals are designed. Because to me, the houses need to look like temples. Because for me, I have a very high sensitivity to aesthetic environment, how it sort of touches me. And I'm not the only one, of course. So what I sort of ended up noticing, and I kind of went down the rabbit hole and research around this concept of neuroaesthetics, that there is actually a neurological effect of certain aesthetic standard that you spoke about, that were coming from, ancient culture and such, but they're inherently sort of have been developed because they impact the brain wave on certain lens. So biophilic environment, certain symmetries and such. So
sorry, can you explain this better? Can you explain this clearer to me? Because obviously, this is new to me. But are you basically saying there's a universal idea of what is beautiful in lived
it's not more of the idea of what is beautiful, but there is a specific impact on the brain and how it feels. More at peace, less stress, all these things directly related to certain beauty attributes that are neuroaesthetic, which are hospital, for instance, are not designed for. They're the opposite. Everything around it, the sheet, the lighting, and I was like, I need to redesign this entire place because it's going to drive me crazy. But this is basically what we don't consider. And I think we don't consider that not because of art or artists, because ultimately it's about understanding where this is important in society and where it's not.